social capital is can be quite almost intangible to define sometimes, but I think the examples we have of our presentation give some sort of tangibility to social capital. And demonstrate some of the kind of best practices, some of the innovations that city administrators like yourselves can use to enhance the social capital inherent within a place, particularly important given the many crises and challenges that our places are facing right now. One of the key areas of social capital is that of volunteering, and IPPO, I think in October, published a piece of work on volunteering during the pandemic in terms of lessons that could be learned for policymakers to make maybe the next big mobilization of volunteering, which when that occurs. I know, I mean, if you put a link in the chat to the report, which is great, okay. The report had a couple of learnings, which I'll share with you briefly before we get to the presentations around the ways in which support can be strengthened for volunteering. The first key learning was that communities don't actually need mobilizing often in a crisis. They're the first responders in a crisis, and they often outpace what voluntary and statutory agencies do. The pandemic taught us that although formal volunteering is down, actually informal volunteering itself is up. So you had people, again, being almost the first responders in the crisis, from things like shopping to various other things, which were taking place. And that in volunteering, just like many other things, the pandemic accelerated existing trends and disrupted existing ways of doing things. IPPO then had a couple of recommendations for policymakers that would be showing leadership and making strategic commitments to involving volunteers. It includes things like coordination, creating high-quality volunteering opportunities. Making volunteering more open and inclusive. This includes opportunity brokering, also making volunteering accessible for all people from across the community and various communities. Promoting flexibility and well-being in volunteering. Investing in management support of volunteering, particularly committing resources and ensuring a good quality volunteering experience, as well as investing in digital. And two further recommendations. One is don't just say thank you, also record and recognize the value of volunteering, the contribution people make, celebrate volunteering, and don't take volunteers for granted. And also the coordination is maybe even more important than mobilization. So resource local volunteering infrastructure and trust people in organizations to do it. So there's a whole lot in that report, which I recommend you have a look at. And I'm sure that Alice and Carla will speak more on the topic of volunteering in their presentation. So we move now to our panel, and Alice Wilcock and Carla Garnelas from Greater London Authority will start with their insights on cultivating social capital in the city. Alice and Carla, over to you.
Thank you very much. So, social capital, looking at social capital in London, social capital measures at their simplest include these 4 OECD combinations, and actually underneath these sit a whole host of other measurements. And one of the key priorities actually in Sadiq Khan, the current mayor's first term, which ran from 2016 to 2021, was actually to look at social integration and establish a definition that could be used across London. And the London Social Integration Strategy focused on different elements which can all be found to contribute to social capital. So we ended up with a definition that included a bit of a triangle, which focused on participation, relationships and equality. And all of those things, as you can see, really fit very well into that OECD combined definition. So we carried out the first version of the Survey of Londoners in 2018-19, and we looked at those measures which contribute to that social capital, and then actually we repeated the survey in 2020-2021, and we began with quite a few measures that were also gathered at a national level, for example in the Community Life Survey, but one of the real drawbacks of that was the sample size was too small for London to give us statistically significant information. So the idea of doing a survey just looking at London with a statistically significant sample was to get some real insight into how London's different from parts of the country. And what you can actually see here from this 2021-22 figures are actually these very high levels of belonging, feelings of belonging to London, which of course do link really highly to social capital. So one of the things that we actually did, as has just been mentioned, during COVID, communities absolutely mobilised themselves to provide support. And communities were very differently affected by COVID, obviously with Black minoritised communities coming off a lot worse than other London communities. But it was also possible to look at the responses in different boroughs having a direct correlation to how much investment previously had gone into supporting volunteer and civil society infrastructure. And those areas tended to be able to mobilise much more quickly and have stronger community networks and links already in place. So to put this simplistically, those areas had better social capital and therefore were able to react faster and more effectively. So community action and civil society was completely crucial in helping mitigate against the impact of COVID. And that was around a whole variety of things, as we know, whether that was food distribution, digital delivery of community services, contacting the isolated and elderly, carrying out shopping, picking up medicines. But the understanding of local, regional and national government of how important civil society links and social capital is really took an upswing as a result of the increased visibility of this activity. And actually, for someone who's been involved in community development and community engagement for a long time, this was actually a really good moment to show that visibility and show the importance of this part of the sector. And that resulted in, when the Mayor set up his London Recovery Board, identifying building strong communities as something that the Mayor really wanted to focus on as a regional player, working in partnership to strengthen those bonds and those things which had made London more resilient during that time. So the mission activities actually map pretty well into some of the mechanisms that were mentioned in the report earlier. And one of the key things that was mentioned was actually this better coordination. And one of the most exciting things to come out of the pandemic has been a really collective, collaborative funding approach from some of London's main funders. And I've put a link here to the Propel Fund, which is literally just open for applications, which has a focus on equity across London. Carla's going to talk a bit more in a moment about our London Lifelines campaign, but we also worked really closely with other regional partners, including London Plus, who are the infrastructure body across London, and we use that to map things like vaccination volunteering capacity with vaccination volunteering demand, for example. And now I'm just going to hand over to Carla to talk about some of our work in a little bit more detail.
Thanks. Hi, I'm Carla Garnelas. I've recently joined the team leading on civil society and volunteering. So just a very quick whistle-stop tour of kind of 3 bits of work that we're doing. So one of the kind of elements of the Building Strong Communities mission was what's called the Civic Strength Index, and you can see some information about this on the slide. But really, this is a piece of work that aimed to provide a lens for local authorities and community organisations to understand the strengths of their communities and how to build on them. I think this is a really interesting and really useful tool when we're looking at kind of how the levels of civic strength interact with other indicators, and then what using that as a tool to identify what we could do differently at local area, where investment might be needed, where we could kind of and particularly for the GLA, where we can kind of invest and support and bring people together. So that's one of the elements of the programme, and we've got some areas that we're hoping to build on with this, which might be thinking about things like how can we measure the strength of relationships or social support and civic responsibility at a more granular level? How can we measure what feel like fairly intangible parts of civic and community strength? And how can we increase the use of data standards on civic data so we can measure things across London? So those are some of the things we're going to be thinking about. Alice has already mentioned this, but this London Lifelines very much chimes with some of the messages in the report on volunteering during the pandemic about the importance of kind of rewarding and recognising volunteers. And that's something that the GLA and the Mayor feel very strongly about, and we really kind of think is really important. So we've run various different programmes around kind of reward and recognition. In last year we had our 10,000 thank yous campaign, where we distributed kind of 10,000 free volunteer thank you cards to volunteers, where people could write their own personal messages of thanks. And this year we're supporting the London Lifelines campaign. And that highlights, it's a new website which highlights the different kinds of volunteering activities in London and the important part volunteers play in building stronger communities and in our city. And as many of you will know, it was International Volunteering Day on Monday, and our Deputy Mayor, Debbie Weeks-Bernard, put out a video thanking volunteers for the really important contribution that we make. So we did a lot of work to kind of promote that with our partners. And then finally, because I'm sure we're running out of time, just to also kind of talk about the work that we're doing around youth social action. And again, this really chimed with some of the messages in the report about the need to create really good quality opportunities for volunteers. And we use volunteering and youth social action to enable all Londoners to contribute and benefit from the city's civic life. Our programmes are match funded by I Will, and they suggest that high quality youth social action should meet 6 principles, which we've put on the slide, and I know again are referred to in the report. And so we're really looking to use social action as a tool and lead programmes that aim to connect young people to their local area and shape their employability prospects, collaborate with grassroots organisations to champion youth voice and strive for improved mental health outcomes, and embed social action and kind of those positive attitudes at a young age within school environments. So those are just, it's a whistle-stop tour, a snapshot of some of the things that we're doing that kind of relate to sort of building and social capital and connecting communities. And I don't know, Alice, if you just want to...
Yeah, just a quick look forward. So I've kind of grouped some of our main activities into 3 different areas. So firstly, we've got direct funding and support, where we are offering funding to civil society organisations. In January or February, we hope to be launching our collaborative sports funding partnership. It won't be called that, it's not a very catchy title, but we're partnered up with London Marathon Charitable Trust there and Sport England, using sport, as Carla was talking about earlier with volunteering, using sport for really positive social outcomes for young people. We've got a really important role in promoting and championing, which links back to the elements in the report about thank you, about good volunteer practice, about resource sharing, and highlighting the sector value. And I think it's really exciting that DCMS just commissioned a new piece of work being done by Pro Bono Economics and another partner to do a really quick look at the value that the sector itself has. And then we've got a real role in citywide learning and best practice to think about how we can reduce barriers to volunteering, because we're very aware that volunteering in the past sometimes has been restricted to certain age groups or certain socioeconomic classes. And we want to make sure that everybody in London, all Londoners, can really benefit from the many benefits of volunteering. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both, Alice and Carla, for those great learnings and insights. I'm looking forward to hearing more in the discussion later on. Let's move on now to the Liverpool City region. We have Adrian Nolan, who's the lead officer for the industrial strategy. He's going to speak to us now. Adrian.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, I'm just going to speak to you for a few minutes about our view and our thinking around social capital in LC, in the Liverpool City region, and the work we've done around that, mainly at a strategic level, and also sort of in terms of some of the project level and service level examples within there too. I suppose a key focus of ours, really, and going back to the highest principle level of the economic strategy, is our plan for prosperity, which we published earlier this year. Very much, one of our key priorities in there is about developing possibly a really strong, inclusive city region, where essentially levelling up for us means where no place is left behind, and within this, it's embedding sort of community wealth building practices within that too. What we are keen for in the Liverpool City region is a much better balance between top-down and bottom-up approaches in the economy. So from a pure economical point of view, that provides better outcomes. And we want a more progressive way of doing economic development, of looking at economic development through a different lens. And that's why we're just as interested in the people side, the community side, the bottom-up side, as opposed to just the sort of standardized top-down approaches to economic development, if you like. So that's kind of like something that runs throughout our kind of economic strategy. and something that, you know, the Metro Mayor here is really, really keen on progressing as well. Just in terms of, you know, civic engagement as well, I mean, we want to make sure that the people's voices has shone through the strategy work we've done as well. So we've been developing our economic strategy. We had something called LCR Listens. That's a sort of a mechanism that the combined authority uses to engage with people across the city, region and communities, not just for economic strategy, but for things like spatial development strategy, many other strategies as well. But, you know, for our strategy and economic strategy, we had over 2,000 people respond to our campaign. And then we've set out specific citizen engagement events as well, sort of citizen roundtables across the city region as well. So I think for us, it's very much about, you know, really making sure that people in the communities understand they have a stake in strategy that's being developed as well. And it's not something that's just done with people like me, they love the policy wonks of the ivory towers. It's actually people, it actually means something, it's meaningful to people in the city region as well. Within the strategy as well, as I say, the big focus on sort of people and places, and I think a key opportunity we identified, you know, just as much as an opportunity is inward investment, just as much as an opportunity is looking at our key sort of, you know, competitive strengths, is actually being a leader in social innovation, because we have that sort of strong heritage in that area. And it's also absolutely critical for the Liverpool City region. We are one of the most deprived places in the UK. We have extremely severe deprivation in you know, covering a lot of our city region. So we need to proactively respond to deprivation, all the public health challenges we've got, which are intense, and of course, you know, how we transition to a more sustainable way of life, the climate emergency. And just on the climate emergency as well, we're thinking about sort of a net zero action plan now, and within that again, one of the key things in that is how we take our communities with us. It's something not done to them, it's something done with them in a very cooperative fashion. So as I say, we have that kind of long-standing reputation for social innovation in Liverpool City region, and a thriving social economy, which to us is really important for helping build those connections, networks and social capital in places. And so it's a key priority for us that came through our strategy, is to really empower, mobilize the sort of the social innovators that we've got across the city region, and the great ideas that are in place, and actually mobilize them, actually make them happen, to solve the challenges that we face. So for us, this is already critical in building up social capital, enabling those resilient and thriving communities we need. And, you know, thriving communities, resilient communities is something, again, that flows right throughout our strategy. And, you know, how do you build that social fabric throughout? It's really important to us. So the plan for prosperity, then, very people focused, very socially very social focused, and very much reflecting, I suppose, the character of the Liverpool City region as well. So that's kind of a strategic overview in terms of some of the how that translates into some, you know, actually backing that up with, let's say, investment, for instance. So there's many ways, there's many things that we've done. There's lots of different things, different examples we could use, but I'll just use a couple of examples here. So for instance, so this is Kindred. This is, we were committed to supporting social enterprise throughout the city region, building on our social economy, and Kindred is a community interest company that we put in £5.5 million into. We work with Power to Change, which a number of you will know, but they put 1 million into this as well. So this is a community interest company that is essentially a social investment vehicle. It's there to help foster that inclusive economy ambition that we've got, support those socially trading organisations through two ways, you know, financial and non-financial means. So the two functions very much being membership. So they do a lot of collaborative peer-to-peer support network activity to grow the collective impact of the sector, and then money as well. So it's a very sort of patient source of funding. So at the same time, it's addressing a very, you know, key economic market failure in that space for socially trading organisations. So repayable grants, their interest, and that helps the STOs grow and maximise their impact. Within Kindred itself, there is a huge demand for it, very oversubscribed, and the work that the team are doing there, which is independent, by the way, of both the LCRCA and Power to Change, despite the fact we funded it, it's very much an independent body. You know, the work's gaining traction, a lot of local traction, a lot of national traction. Government's interested in the model as well. We talked, you know, there too about, you know, how that model could be maybe replicable, how it could be scalable across the city, across not just city region, but the country. Different areas are interested in that model too. So, you know, it's something that's really gaining traction, and you know, we are working with Kindred as well that, you know, in terms of thinking how can we position the Liverpool City region more broadly as a social investment pathfinder. And I think that's following the launch of the Admiral Social Investment Commission earlier this year, which was launched in Liverpool, that report. And, you know, it kind of set out the kind of rather depressing sort of state of the social investment sector, social investment environment across the country over the last decade, which really hasn't provided the returns and the impacts that it could have. And within that, you know, Victor Lord Adewale had said himself that he felt Liverpool City region has the conditions, the ingredients to really be sort of a pathfinder for social investment. So we're thinking about, you know, through Kindred and others and other sector leaders about how can LCR actually become sort of that sort of maybe perhaps national pathfinder for sort of social investment going forward. And that also builds on a social investment summit, national one that was done in Liverpool this year during the Good Business Festival, which brought together a number of key national social investors and led by the Metro Mayor and Liverpool City Mayor as well. So, you know, there's a lot of interest in that area, and clearly we have issues with UK Shared Prosperity Fund. We're not getting, you know, as many areas. We're not going to be getting the answers that we had previously to European structural funds. So, how do we maximise things like social investment to fill some of those gaps? So that's just one example, really, sort of a model of how we're trying to support the social economy, which very much in turn supports those communities and develops that kind of social fabric of those communities as well. And finally, just in terms of community focus and maybe how we're developing services based on you know, the sort of principles. Just an example here about the place-based Cradle to Careers programme in North Birkenhead. It's very much about integration of services, but also very much about bringing in community leaders and empowering communities in terms of how the services that are delivered in a very cooperative way in those places. So it puts people in North Birkenhead at the heart of education services. And you know, the aim of the programme is ultimately to help improve literacy standards, give those families access to support they need, improve quality of life, and importantly, improve that communication between the community and organisations in those areas. So bringing together a whole host of organisations, you know, really in an integrated way, but making sure this is very much also sort of, you know, very community empowered as well at the heart of that. And there's a whole thing, there's programmes in there, things like local pride campaigns, involving the local residents in decisions about the programme. That, you know, it's very much about them. It shouldn't be something that's done to them. It should be something they are very much involved with. And, you know, some of the key outcomes from this at the moment are multidisciplinary community support, but also community empowerment outcomes as well. And this programme has been pretty successful in North Birkenhead, and it's now being rolled out with £5 million of combined authority money to extend the programmes to other areas across the Liverpool City region as well. So it's kind of, I suppose, it's a public service reform piece, but it's a public service reform piece that ensures that communities are very much at the heart of it. And that's kind of, so I'll leave it there because there's other things, you know, there's obviously time's pressing, but, you know, there's other things we've been doing, like, you know, clearly grants and things for, you know, supporting community wealth building activity, supporting civic society, etc. But just wanted to focus here on just a couple of things really from the strategy and how that's rolled out, really from the strategy and realising that strategy in terms of, you know, actual programmes, putting the money where the mouth is in likes of Kindred, and how we're trying to direct some, you know, meaningful community focused sort of, you know, support in the places that need it most in our city region. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
We go on now to our final speaker, which is a social innovator, former Vice Mayor of Athens and co-founder of IPPO Cities. Amalia Zepou. Amalia, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you for inviting this very interesting session. My name is Amalia Zepou. I used to be Vice Mayor for Civil Society and Innovation from 2014 to 2019. And now I am at an NGO doing social innovation European programs at different levels, setting up a competence center for social innovation in Greece, and also working in rural areas. Now, what I thought of doing today, which is very different from what I just heard, is to bring 3 different examples where the municipalities created mechanisms to tap into the volunteer capacity of the city, okay, at 3 entirely different situations. to highlight actually only 3 final points about the importance of cities to be able to evaluate differences in the types of communities they want to attract and the types of challenges they want to address. Okay, so the first one is during the Athens municipality years, we created during the financial crisis, where there was a lot of lack of capacity and lack of budget in the municipality, there was a rise in initiatives in the city. So in this case, it is not that there was a mechanism to involve volunteers for the needs of the city, but the reverse effort. The reverse effort meant to identify the already existing initiatives that were already happening in the city. So this is a different type of muscle, let's say, that a municipality should develop, I think, to tap into what already exists. And here we had guerrilla gardening, soup kitchens, people reviving streets with dance and music and all sorts of cultural events. What we did, and the mechanism, was to create a platform that collected these activities and connected them between them. So it was a mechanism that looked a little bit like this, which meant that at first level, we had to identify and collect those initiatives on the platform. We had more than 4,000 by the end of the 5-year period, 4,000 initiatives and 450 informal groups that had risen during those years. Then we wanted to connect them between them so that people doing similar things would know about each other. We wanted to evaluate some of the best practices and incorporate them in the running of the municipality. So that was the form of the mechanism that the Sinathina platform created. One other thing that we did was to give them space. I'm thinking of the recommendations that I read in the very interesting paper that you shared with us, Jeremy, about infrastructure for volunteers. People that do things in the city want to have a space to meet. So this was a previously squatted small building near the municipality building that we gave to them so that they could gather and do and organize further activities that they liked. So again, I think that in terms of designing mechanisms, it is in the effort to go towards the city, towards the citizens, rather than to sit back and wait for volunteers to come and ask for participation. It's the other way around. The other example is about an abandoned building. It's here at the top left of this slide. That was a building that was abandoned and squatted for many years. The municipality had neither capacity nor budget to run it. It did have some money from the European Union to refurbish it. And this picture shows after it was repainted how it looked, but they still had absolutely no clue what to do with it. So instead of trying to have an idea, a top-down idea, we did exactly the opposite. What did we do? We invited the previous squatters to create a public consultation in the streets, asking people how would they imagine this building to work in the future. So we collected 470 ideas from people who came and played, and it was among the squatters there were artists and people from the cultural sector that created this completely different type of consultation. Instead of having surveys or questionnaires, they just in the street they asked people to draw a maquette of the building on the street, and then just tell their ideas or draw their ideas or sing their ideas. Of course, that was also a way to break the ice with all the people that had been very angry against the municipality for many years. Those squatters used to be people against the political regime of the time. Anyway, this is another way to change the language and think differently, as the paper mentions, think differently about what volunteers can do and how to approach them. I think it is also a way to say a big thank you in a different way. Give them back the building, but just in a collaborative manner. Again, here the muscle is the coordinating muscle that the municipality has to have in order to bring the best out of what people intend in the first place, even if it is squatters that are initially illegal in squatting a building. And here is the way we collected all the ideas, and then we saw that people wanted educational, social, and cultural events in the building. And then thanks to that, we made an open call for someone among those community groups to manage the building. So the next step was to create a co-governing model of between municipality and a community group to run the public market. And it happened. It happened. Today it is a market full of activities with orchestras and workshops and educational events. So it worked. It took many years. We had a lot of people in the city council would freak out when we came up with those ideas, but they worked in the end. So that was a success. And the third is something completely different, but I think it just it taps also in the same thing. On the island, on the Greek island, semi-arid, the challenge is water shortage, all right? It has desalination plants that create enormous environmental problems. They need energy and they pollute the sea. And this is in an island that has for centuries managed its water in the most sustainable and resilient manner that exists. I mean, it's a fantastic example of water commons. So how do you tap into a rural society? Here you have a very difficult, let's say, community of natural volunteers that do not call themselves volunteers, but have voluntarily run the water management of the island for generations. So again, how does the municipality tap into this natural side in order to rethink its own water management strategy, building also on past knowledge? We invited artists that displayed those activities and those methods that the local tradition has, displayed it in the central square. And it is with art, let's say, art became a sort of catalyst to open a dialogue with a community that is traditionally very, very closed. And that's it. So it is three very different examples to highlight two very simple ideas that there are different challenges, want different types of mechanisms, different types of design to approach volunteer capacity of a piece. And also the other thing is that different communities have completely different languages, and to be able to evaluate the type of language they will open up dialogue with the municipality. Just two very simple things to say how complex social capital is. I mean, no matter you know how good our design is, there's always something you don't understand about the people out there, and municipalities are not very good at that. They're not very good at psychology, let's say, simple common sense psychology. That's it. Thanks from me.
We've got some questions in the chat box, which is great. If you do want to also go on camera and speak to our panel with a question, please use the hand raising functionality. But we'll kick off with two from the chat I'm going to take together as they kind of speak to each other. It's a question from Maureen Berner. Firstly is for London. I love the idea of how social capital is developed and used through volunteering. How does that fit with building social capital in areas that don't have the capacity to volunteer? And also piggyback on that with a question from Carol Amsden, who says, building on Maureen's question, how we maintain people's willingness and capacity to volunteer as the cost of living crisis may increasingly mean they can't afford to, for example, travel costs, as well as the need to find paid employment. So if I start with Alice, Carla, on that one, then others can maybe come in.
Thank you. And I think this point about enabling people to access volunteering is a really, really important one. And the way that we've acted on that is to really use data to identify and target particular either geographies of place or communities of interest that historically have had less involvement in volunteering social action or might have less civil society infrastructure. So, for example, when we were thinking about our schools-based volunteering and social action programme, we looked at indices of multiple deprivation data and the IDACI, which is a subset of that around child poverty, to identify which schools we particularly wanted to work with. And by doing that, we hope by bringing in free to access volunteering opportunities for those young people in those areas that we were bringing them an opportunity they wouldn't have had otherwise, and also bringing them the habit of volunteering at a young age to hopefully sustain their interest as things went forward. Similarly, when we did some work on sports activity with Laureus Model Cities, we did a similar kind of data exercise to look at sports and physical activity participation, to look at existing structures and local authority support, civil society support. And then we actually did a roadshow. We went out to those different geographical areas and talked to them about what they wanted and whether they'd like to work with us in a partnership approach to build up that volunteering and social action and sports activity. And so that was about identification and targeting, and then giving people the resources so that they could be engaged. I think this point about, and we also did a very similar thing with our major events volunteering, where we really wanted to get a volunteer base for the Euros that much more reflected the diversity of London. So we went out, we worked with universities, we worked with young people groups to bring in that younger, more diverse participant into volunteering. And I think linking into the point about affordability, which is so important, one of the things that we do in order to try and set an example of good practice is we always pay volunteer travel expenses, and we also pay subsistence, so that volunteers, depending on their shift lengths, can get something to eat and drink. And that's something that we really promote with our partner organisations that we work with as well. And similarly, the young people that have taken part in our serious youth violence steering group, we pay them not only travel and subsistence, but also a day rate based on the London living wage, because those young people are much more than volunteers. They are doing work in our groups, and we want to recognise it as such. But I think this point about cost is such an important one, and you're right, it's only going to get more pressing as time goes on.
Thank you, guys. Maureen, I see, did you want to come in on this? I see you on camera.
Thank you for this session. I'm speaking from North Carolina in the US, and I'm hearing some fabulous ideas. So first of all, thank you for this session. I think there is a larger systematic issue that we have to address, which is building up of social capital within the communities, building on top of the social capital that already exists, and amplifying it and being able to direct it. And so I think the efforts that you're discussing are fabulous. All these examples are fabulous, but I still think it's a hard nut to crack in terms of often the impacts and the benefits of social capital that come to families and communities are often through adults, or often through the social structures where they help each other out. They have relationships where they can rely on each other. They can share their social capital and use their social capital to advance economically. But those are not the individuals who can actually participate in the volunteering, which might facilitate some of those relationships. So,
okay, sorry, Maureen. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I'm getting a bit more of a better understanding about what you were really trying to kind of get at there. And I think you're right. Of course, it's much easier to kind of amplify social capital when you've got an existing kind of base that you're operating from. I suppose I would counter that from a community development point of view, that there is not going to be an area that has zero social capital, because even in the most deprived neighbourhood with the zero infrastructure, you're always going to have faith groups, for example, often really fantastic way of kind of starting to build out in an area. Also things like schools, you know, because particularly in the, I don't know what the US equivalent, but primary age children, you know, children under the age of 11, you get that parental support and interconnectedness as a community. And it may not be formal, but you've got the starts there of some informal roots that then you can build on. And I'm not saying it's not difficult, because it is, and it does oftentimes take funding, you know, and one of the best ways to build up that social capital, and I did some work in London in a ward not too far away from mine, about building community networks and bonds, and it's about identifying those initial champions. So you find the woman who always gathers other people around her at the school gates, you find the person who is always talking to the other dads in the park when they're playing football, and then you use them to be your champions and build up those networks in the community. And yet sometimes you can do that with next to no money. I mean, one of the women that we supported to sort of do that, we literally paid for coffee, tea bags and biscuits. And then that gave her the base from which she was able to start. But you have to go out and find and identify those people first.
Thank you, Alice. I'm going to bring in Adrian and Amalia. Adrian, do you have thoughts on that?
Just on the point that yeah, the whole thing around sort of community connectors is something that's really important, isn't it? And you know, it's understanding what makes resilient communities, isn't it? And I'd agree about there's always a risk, isn't there? We downplay social capital that exists in our communities, and we start with negative language, particularly in our area, Liverpool City region, which is such severe deprivation in many areas. We look at it from a sort of a deficit viewpoint to start with, rather than actually an asset-based approach. And actually lots of these communities have got very strong assets, and you know, I suppose one of the reasons why Liverpool City region's got particularly vibrant social economy is because the social and economic problems that it's had over many decades, and that's built up that kind of sort of solidarity, if you like, across the city region. This is just a Liverpool example, but you know, it kind of shows that, you know, you can have those existing conditions in place and those strong, the community connectors, as just mentioned then, and they are there, and you can build on that. And we can have precarious, left behind communities, whatever you want to call them, and there's plenty of studies on them, particularly sort of recently in light of COVID. But particularly in areas like this, the conditions are there to actually, you know, build up that capital and use those people, those individuals, identify them to actually work with you in addressing some of these issues and actually start to get off the ground. That's how that North Birkenhead example I mentioned before, I think, identify key people across that area to actually help provide that community empowerment activity across the North Birkenhead area, and link into that kind of, you know, multi-agency approach to providing better outcomes for young people, basically. So there's that risk, isn't there? We can always talk down and think of a deficit view, and actually a lot of these communities already have strong, you know, strong assets in place with the people who are there, and already fairly strong social fabric. It's how we start to bring that together and use that for, you know, to produce the outcomes they need to, you know, provide the optimal outcomes for those places and people.
Thanks, Adrian. Yeah, Amalia, your thoughts on this? Briefly, deficits of social capital or unlocking assets inherent in communities.
No, I was just thinking that the examples, the two first examples I brought were really no budget efforts. There was no budget. We had to use the people out there. What we did in the municipalities was to name some city officials free rangers, so that they would go out there and identify the champions that you were just mentioning. So, but the job description of a free ranger for a city official is not in the framework of a city administration, in Greece at least. And that, unfortunately, it never became, let's say, established as a job description. We did it at that time because the financial crisis allowed us to start improvising for a small period of time, between 3 or 4 years. But some cities like Ghent or cities in Holland, for example, have established that job description. I'm just to say how, I mean, you can do it with no budget when at a time of crisis, when people naturally turn to those things. But it is very important to create a new sort of job description for city officials if you are to move on into this direction, I think. And it's not obvious. It hasn't happened in Greece, even though we did what we did.
Thank you. Question from Robert Rogers, and I see is on camera, right across the living. Robert, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you all, because I think it's a really fascinating conversation around how social capital is and the way we're looking at it and we're trying to support it has been shifting in the last few years. I'm a trustee working with Volunteer Scotland, and here in Scotland, we've been trying to explore how the shift that we see in volunteering, and Alice, you talked about it earlier, from formal and informal being one more episodic, is expressed in terms of social capital. And the question I have, I guess, is now for everyone in the panel, is how do we engage with this notion that social capital might be latent rather than always expressed, and they only come out at moments of crises, moments where we need to respond, and we're able to do so. We've seen that in COVID and in the pandemic. We're seeing that, we're arguing, at least we're seeing that at the moment in the cost of living. Amalia, you talked about in the financial crisis, having a response in Athens about that. How do we engage with this notion of latent social capital?
Can we start with Alice, then go Adrian, then Alice and Carla?
Oh, that's unfair, Jeremy. I'm still trying to collect my thoughts. I think that you wouldn't expect me to say anything else, but I think that's a really interesting question. And sorry, Carla, do come in. I mean, I think this question about latent social capital is really interesting, because I think that COVID had conditions which enabled people to volunteer in a way that they hadn't been able to earlier. And I think the report identifies some of that. So this frictionless volunteering, and also, which has been kind of a desire, you know, we've had, I can't even remember what we used to have, an app actually, even in London, sort of like quick one-off volunteering opportunities. And that's, of course, the kind of thing that NHS responders, building off the Good Sam app, was trying to pick up on. But I think what's more interesting in a way is this whole question about language, because I think when we did some research a while back with the Behavioural Insights team, and we were looking at people who were trying to access our volunteering website to see if different people from different backgrounds reacted to language differently. And this point about people not self-describing as volunteers is so important, because there are so many people out there who are active in their local communities, and this links really well to this idea of the rise of informal volunteering. Yes, informal volunteering might have risen, but on the other hand, maybe more people actually realised and were able to self-define as informal volunteers. And so, you know, actually shifting the number of people volunteering in London.
Sorry, Alice, we've lost you, but let's go to Adrian to speak up. Adrian.
Yeah, I suppose I'll put a bit of a slightly different slant, maybe a bit more theoretical slant in terms of what makes a strong place. And it's that combination of social, public and private, and how they interact together in an effective way that makes resilient places. And this is part about how we plan for places, both in terms of the physical environment, and our head of planning here has got a lot of thoughts around this, around placemaking and how that fits in. And I know it's been mentioned a bit today as well. That's important, and then about how you plan economically for places, of course, as well. And I suppose for us, then, you know, that interconnection, that weaving together the social, the public, and the private in the most effective way. That's about how you plan. And in our case as well, it's about viewing, say, for instance, the social side. Social economy is actually part of the economy. So you are planning, you know, you're actually planning, you're looking at the importance of social capital, looking at the importance of the social economy as an actual distinct part of the economy, and has real intrinsic value. in economic and social terms as well. And then there's things about how you measure volunteering here as well, you know, the economic value of that type of thing. And, you know, it's kind of at that sort of strategic policy level, it's how you look at it as an opportunity for planning your economy, really. I think that's how we kind of view it here, which is why our economic strategy is very much focused around how that social economy then supports strong, vibrant communities and development of social capital. It's that opportunity that it provides, and looking at it from a bit of a different lens rather than just reactive in terms of obviously cost of living and COVID. It's that kind of proactive planning for it and actually looking at it as the opportunity as part of your economic makeup.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adrian. Then we've got a couple of minutes left, so Amalia, some final thoughts.
Yeah, I love this notion of latent, the latent volunteers, the latent social capital. I think I've always thought that most people have it in them at some point in their life to help in some social way. And how do you tap into that? Exactly. And just one thought, I read a book called Palaces for the People, and it's about social infrastructure. When cities create places for people to meet in a neighborhood, coffee shops, squares, parks, benches, that is something that brings out this latent social capital, in the sense that when people are together, they talk about the places they share, and that is how it comes up. So that's what municipalities can do. Create more social, give more social infrastructure, meaning places to meet.
Thank you. That's great. Actually, Alice has returned. Alice, you want to finish your thought? You were cut off midway through before we closed.
I'm sorry, I got so stressed out by trying to get back on the internet. I think I've lost my thought. But I just wanted to agree with that point about social infrastructure. And actually, I think we did some, the team in the GLA did some really interesting work around that. And then we had some great conversations with Bloomberg. So I must dig out the report and send it to you, Jeremy, and then you'll be able to share it with people here.
Perfect. Great. And that's a great way to kind of bring this towards a close. There's been lots of chat in the chat around connections as well. So I would encourage people who want to continue this conversation, please put your details in the chat. We've also got everyone's emails at this call, and we will facilitate this conversation going forward, particularly I think to be part of IPPO 2's work in the new year as well. So great to be part of this conversation. So it's 2 minutes to 4. We're going to finish at 4 o'clock. It remains for me to thank our brilliant panel. Thank you to Alice Wilcock, thank you to Carla Garnelas, thank you to Adrian Nolan, and thank you to Amalia Zepou. We have further IPPO events coming up. We have an event next week on Debunk, Inform or Avoid, Countering Misinformation, with some great speakers of that, launching an IPPO report on that topic. Then our next IPPO Cities event is in the new year, 2023. Scary, it's nearly 2023 already, on the process of good policy making. And like I said, continue the conversation. You can tweet us on our brand new IPPO handle, IPPO UK, and also on the website, codersociety.com/IPPO Cities. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for your comments, and looking forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks a lot.